This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Content Marketing World, the world's premier content marketing event. Find out more at contentmarketingworld.com today. Use the offer code BeanCast. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 546, You Can't Fake Virginity. For Monday, June 10th, 2019, it's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norp. Thanks for joining us. Do good ideas for advertising require non-advertising thinking? Many shops are hiring experts from their clients' fields in order to presumably generate more authentic ad ideas. Is this practice worth expanding or simply missing the point? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, the increasing danger of smaller competitors, whether advertising still needs project managers, Instagram's latest ad option, plus the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder of analytics consultancy Quantent Marketing, Ms. Tamara Gaffney. Tamara, welcome back.
Well, thank you. It's so good to be back again.
Now, also with us, a man obsessed with writing and selling books to feed his dog, freelance copywriter, author, and blogger, Mr. Dan Goldgeier. Dan, what's going on?
Oh, thank you for having me back on the show, Bob. It's always a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Now, next up, he's Associate Vice President of Marketing Strategy at Arizona State University, author, speaker, Mr. Adam Pierno. Adam.
Hey, Bob. How are you, sir? Good to be back.
I'm well. And finally, he's the most prolific writer I know and one of the world's marketing world's brightest thinkers. He's vice president and analyst for customer experience at Gartner, Mr. Augie Ray. Augie, I was trying to say nice stuff about you and then stumbled over it.
It was very nice stuff you said. Thank you very much. And happy Donald Duck Day. Today, 85 years ago today, Donald Duck made his debut. Something to celebrate.
And always second to Mickey Mouse. Never the top dog. Sad, sad, sad. Well, let's get into the topics. And first up, I saw this interesting thought piece on Adweek, which posed the idea that creative teams going forward really should be representative of the brand you're promoting and the audience you're reaching. Basically, not ad people. They're talking about getting like a doctor in if you're working on a pharmaceutical company, or if you're doing tech to get a technology person in. Dan, there's a twisted logic to this thinking. I mean, I kind of like it, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity here, but is it too twisted? Does it go off the rails? Because when I'm reading this article, it feels like the person is saying we need less ad thinking, and I don't know that that's necessarily the case.
Yeah, it's not twisted, but it is a little disingenuous. I mean, the author of that piece has been in traditional advertising agencies for 30 years, and I don't think she's about to fire herself. Now, you can make an argument that when you have something of very high level, like a doctor, or if you have a medical, a very, very technical account, like a healthcare, and you're marketing directly to doctors, it helps to get a doctor's perspective. But that does not mean that you should automatically just look for people who don't have any advertising experience.
Well, let me stop you there, because it's just like, why hire these people? I mean, can't you just find a doctor and consult with them a little bit and get some insight? I mean, that's what we used to do. We used to do focus groups. We used to do research. We'd actually talk to people.
Absolutely. And the point of any good advertising professionals to have some empathy, to get out and meet people, meet your audience, meet your client, and there may not be a lot of that anymore. We love to just Google. When we research, we use Google, or we just take a deck that somebody else has put together for us. But, this debate has gone on for a long time, and in getting away from this idea of a doctor. We hear some people suggest that advertising agencies should be hiring stand-up comedians and accountants and jug band guitarists. And, there are a lot of out-of-work journalists who are looking to advertising and content marketing to pay their bills. But one of the core arguments I keep hearing ad executives make is that ad agencies and the people who are in them are not valued by clients anymore for their knowledge and expertise, so we're not respected and we're not compensated accordingly. Now comes the premise that anybody can do advertising regardless of their previous career and their background. That is not going to solve a respectability issue.
Augie, what's your take on all this? I mean, it's, I always go to you for the customer service experience or the customer experience here. Do you get better, more authentic content when you're working with professionals from that industry? And do we need less ad thinking in the way that we communicate? And is all this a good thing or just overthinking it?
Well, there's always something to be said for the value of diverse teams, right? I mean, we certainly all recognize that. But, I have to agree that this was really just a provocative article. The idea that build your creative teams with people who aren't versed in advertising was the headline, and yet the writer literally says there is value in hiring people with decades of experience in the advertising industry. And of course, as was previously pointed out, the fact is you need to do your research. You need to understand your customers. You need to develop your personas and develop your customer-centric strategies. The concern I have with the approach here is that hiring a doctor architect to be on your team is not going to be any substitute for doing the hard work of meaningful research. And even if you do hire one, you still need to do the research. So, let's celebrate diverse teams. But I think the headline was unnecessarily provocative in making a case for the value of diverse teams.
Oh, no doubt. This article was definitely provocative. And I don't think that the reason I put it in the rundown was because I thought the article was great, but the idea was interesting. This idea of, where does an industry expert belong in the creative team, or does it belong in the creative team? I think that is a valid point and worth discussing. And I think that
you read a little more into it than I did, though. I think, interestingly enough, I didn't think she was saying if you are advertising to doctors, have a doctor on the creative team. If you're advertising to architects, hire an architect on the creative team. I read it as saying, have these people on the creative team, period, because you need fresh thinking in your advertising. So in general, I would say, yeah, obviously you want to engage some of the people who are representative of your audience and your target. You certainly want to test with them. You certainly want to research with them. I don't think there's any harm of having them be on the team, but I just don't think casting a wide net for a diverse team is inherently the secret to creating better advertising.
The research word keeps coming up, Tamara, and it's just like, is there a problem with research that it's just not uncovering this information, or are clients just not trusting research and they're wanting like this firsthand experience on their creative teams that's driving a move like this?
I think there's a part of it is there isn't enough research, and then in other places there's too much. But one of the last things I was doing before I started this new company was working on a messaging doc for advertising. And we could not, it took months over specific word choices because the jargon and the insider perspective that we were trying to put on a creative brief to give to an agency was so steeped in just nonsense, frankly. People that would read that from the outside wouldn't know what on earth we were talking about. And so I think what's happening to a certain degree is that companies are getting very insulated inside themselves, and they feel like nobody understands them but them. And that's because they've created an entire vernacular that only they speak. And I believe that if they cut creatives out of the process or try and make them industry people, all that will happen is that dogma will extend into their advertising and it will fail miserably. That's
the exact value of having an agency and having creative people. You nailed it. That third-party perspective where someone with experience can step in and say, you're talking to yourself, or you're using jargon that is just something that you say in your conference room, but nobody in your audience will understand. That's why that's important. That, you know,
but
oh,
these companies, they don't actually want to hear it. They don't want to hear that what they think is the truth is actually nonsense.
But isn't that what research and testing is all about, though? Is making the client listen to the actual reaction of people in the target audience?
It is. And I think part of the other challenge is that by the time an agency gets involved in a campaign, they've lost all the time to do research because the client wants it right away. And that, I mean, this is a kind of a broken system. When I was in advertising in the 90s, so, you know, a long time ago, we had work back schedules and we would say, we want to launch on this date and we need to start on that date. And now it seems like you call the agency and say, can I have an ad tomorrow? And the poor agency doesn't have time to do that kind of research anymore, nor do they have money. And I think that there's a trust problem, because I was reading a lot of other articles that you posted up on the Flipboard about how the advertising relationship with clients is kind of breaking down.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We're in the midst of like a total reckoning with the relationship between clients and agencies. There's a lot of distrust from a lot of bad acting throughout the years, but also just from the increasing pressure, downward pressure of costs and trying to figure out where to reduce those costs. Agencies are very easy, target for that type of thinking. Dan, talk to me a little bit about the old thinking, the old way of doing things, about the way good creatives kind of became the roles that they were representing. I mean, I always found, I was a copywriter back in the day, it's just like, that's how I started in advertising. And, I was always having to become the role of the client. And that took a lot of work and a lot of insight and a lot of research. And I eventually built trust with my client because they knew that I understood their voice, how they wanted to project themselves, and I understood their products and their markets and their audiences. Why is that not enough anymore?
Well, as Tamara and Augie pointed out a little earlier, there's not a lot of time and there's not a lot of resources to do that. I think
there's never been enough time. I mean,
but you know what? But and it depends on where you are and where you work, but how you're treated. I'm a freelancer, so I rarely. I don't always have direct client contact unless they're my own clients. And many times, if I'm working on behalf of an agency, the client never knows that I'm doing their work. And I think that I think that when you are a creative in this business, you need to put yourself in the role of the client, yes, but also the customer that you are talking to. And I think that because people are so stuck online and they don't get out of their office and they don't go talk to people and they don't take the time to do that, then you get the kind of advertising that talks to ourselves. It's what I always say is whenever you can, take the factory tour. Just don't drink the Kool-Aid when you're there. Get out and meet the clients, get out and meet the people who are buying these products. And it is with these truncated deadlines that we all have, it just doesn't happen as much as it used to. And I think that that's just short-circuiting everything. And the quality of the work suffers.
Is part of the problem that there's not any kind of long-term relationship anymore? Like
that's part of it too.
You have creative teams floating from agency to agency, and you've got clients who are no longer having, breaking up with agencies after years and decades of experience with that same agency. I mean, with all that understanding of the brand going out the window, every time you make a move like that, it just seems to me like there's that's the problem. If you actually committed and actually realized that when you're picking an agency, you're going to have to stick with that agency for a good 5 to 10 years, and you're going to build up an equity in that relationship.
Yeah, and not only do you want to have an equity in the relationship of the agency for 5 to 10 years, you want the same creatives working on those businesses for at least a few years. I know that creatives are restless people, but in one of my agency jobs, I worked on the same client for 4 or 5 years, and it wasn't exclusive, wasn't 100% time dedicated to that, but you learn the rhythm of these people and you learn the way they think, and then you learn their business from inside and out, and you become better at it.
I'm still going to remain, though. I'm going to remain an advocate, though, that we can't bypass research. We can't bypass testing. I agree that
I'm not agreeing.
longevity of
I don't
relationships.
think
Totally agree with that.
nobody's arguing with that.
But the fact is that a lot of long-term relationships with agencies have also, and we all have experiences, sometimes gotten lazy. Sometimes the agency ends up with the same tunnel vision, internal vision problem that their clients have. And so, we can talk about the value of longevity. We can talk about the risks of longevity. And the solution, it seems to me, whether you are new or old, is to make sure that you're putting time and budget in for research and making sure the client understands why that's important. And truthfully, I think sometimes, having been on both sides of this relationship, the agencies don't do a very good job of laying out a timeline and making the case for why these things are so important, because we're so eager to please the client that, we just want to demonstrate our creativity. We jump straight into that when maybe the decision should be made. We need to pause and learn more. So I don't want to lose that in this discussion of longevity. I see the values. I also see the risks in that.
Yeah,
I've also seen a lot of testing just get ignored. I mean, there were like brand tests that I saw that said, absolutely do not call something this product name. And everyone went, that was nice. And then they called it that. And, seriously, it was like,
how'd it work out?
Well, I don't know, TBD. But I think that internally companies decide which things they're open to perhaps changing their opinion on, and other things they're not. And so there's no point in testing something that they're not going to change their opinion if the test comes back you shouldn't go that direction. I think the biggest test is really consumer response and the experience that they're showing. And what we're seeing in the advertising business is ad blockers running rampant. And did you read the articles about Google and their API change? And the whole industry is having a crisis of faith. They're having a massive structural, changeover, almost as massive as going into artificial intelligence will be for, our economy at some point in the future, where the way that they typically did things in cycles of 1 year planning process just don't exist, and they never will again. And they haven't really figured out how to make enough money off of the kind of quick turnarounds and fast research that has to happen in the internet world, in the digital world. So to me, there's like a much deeper, bigger, kind of shift in the surface of advertising, and the pressure is coming out in all these different places, almost like, a volcano eruption.
No matter how you read this article, whether you read it like I was reading it or you read it like Augie was reading it, there's still this underlying uncomfortable thought that somehow being an ad guy is bad in this business. That, we kind of brushed around this subject about, we hire for this perspective from different perspectives, doctors, architects, journalists. We get all this different perspective, and it's much more valuable than this dirty old ad thinking. And I'm like, Adam, that doesn't, I mean, am I reading too much into this? But it just feels like we hate ourselves so much that we're not willing to accept that this is actually useful knowledge, that being an ad professional requires a lot of expertise and a lot of years and a lot of wisdom and a lot of thinking. And it's not just dirty, awful stuff that we need to get rid of and sweep under the rug.
No, you're correct. There is so much self-loathing. I was just recently in a heated Twitter debate earlier this week. It might have been the week before, where people were saying, hey, the ad industry is falling apart, and why is that happening? And then everybody's throwing eggs at itself, while the whole thing is crumbling. And someone really smart, who was it? It was Farrah Bostic, actually, who is super smart. She piped in and said, actually, if you think about all the ills that advertising are causing in society with fake ads and the paid model, the free model for Facebook and other things that let these problems into society, maybe we should be a little harder on ourselves. And I was like, oh God, it's like, I really don't know what's a safe place in to say advertising is not so bad. But I do think from a profession, art directors, copywriters, account managers, people that are doing the day-to-day work are professionals. They have a skill, they have something valuable to offer, and it's really hard for those people to have pride in the work they're doing and understand how they're contributing to business in the current environment and the way that.
I think you just hit on something there, though, because there's something different than having pride in your discipline and being hard on yourself. I always joke, you can look at all sorts of trust surveys about what people think, and advertising and marketing executives are always down in the same level as Congress and and it just always amazes me that that the very discipline that exists to help our brands improve their business and improve their reputation does such a lousy job of doing it itself for the discipline of marketing. And so I actually think if we were harder on ourselves, we could take more pride. When you and what got me thinking about this is when you just said that we should take pride in helping our clients' business. But how often has advertising focused not on how we helped our clients' business, but on factors and on metrics that simply weren't all that important? The social media era, the accumulation of likes, and I just reach, and I just if we really were driving our customers' business with regularity, we would solve the reputation issue that we have with clients. We would solve the reputation issue we have in the world, and I think we'd solve the reputation issue we have within our own discipline.
And to bring up Farah again, I mean, Farah has on a number of occasions talked about the ethics in marketing and how there is no ethics practice of marketing. There's ad hoc ethical approaches to marketing, but the whole idea that you go through ethics training like doctors do or lawyers do. I mean, they're not lawyers aren't necessarily liked any more than advertising people, but at least they have to go through an ethics course and up it every few years in order to maintain their license. So, I mean, from advertising, it seems like we really need to come up with some kind of ethics approach, some kind of codified ethics approach that everybody has to hold to as far as a standard in order to feel that pride again. Well, this has been an interesting conversation, but we need to move on. And I want to talk next about the threat from below, how smaller competitors and startups used to be a nuisance, but now they're representing the biggest threats to our business and can sometimes put us out of business. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first, if you have not started to look at your fall conference schedule, if you have not started yet, you need to get on it now. Time is running out. And if there's one event that you're going to put as a top priority on all of your lists for every single one of your people, for yourself even, Content Marketing World is the one that I'm recommending to you. So many of our past guests are going to be speakers there. You'd be crazy to pass it up. I mean, people like Scott Monty, love Scott. He's been on the show so many times, like 7 years now he's been coming on the program. Kate O'Neill, Tamsin Webster is going to be keynoting the whole thing. They're all going to be there. Nearly every major global brand is going to be there as well. And they're expecting over 4,000 attendees. This is not some small conference. This is something that is major in the business, and it's something that you need to look at. If you're an agency person, you need to consider Content Marketing World as a prime stop, because Content Marketing World is the world's original and largest annual gathering of content marketing professionals, all coming to hear the latest thinking on every topic imaginable about content marketing. For instance, I did mention Scott Monty would be there. Well, the first time I saw Scott speak, he was still head of social media at Ford, and he presented this fabulous case study. I think they were still doing that Fiesta project that got so much attention. And he's one of the best at breaking down complex subjects, complex campaigns into these useful nuggets that you can take and walk away with and actually put into practice right away. I walked away from that session feeling about 10 times smarter, and he's just one of the people there. And quite frankly, they're not just stealing BeanCast guests and putting them on stage. I mean, I've mentioned a lot of people from my show who are going to be there, but there's many, many more content marketing professionals who will be there, some of the best in the business, offering their expertise and their insight into what's best for the marketing world going forward. And the best part for my agency listeners out there is CM World is rolling out lots of great networking and learning opportunities that are specifically focused on you. I mean, they've got the whole agency track of sessions to explore. They've got a branded content track. They even have an agency exclusive cocktail hour. And I know I love talking about this, but when they break out the bar and they give you free drinks, you know that you're important to them. That's not something that happens to everybody. Plus, there's literally hundreds of new business prospects roaming the convention hall. This is your opportunity to be in the same room with somebody who you want to get on as a client. I mean, 4,000 attendees and every major global brand showing up, you're bound to run into somebody you want as a new business prospect. There really isn't any good excuse for you not to send at least one member of your staff, and heck, why not send yourself? I mean, September 3rd is when it starts, runs through the 6th of September, and it's happening in Cleveland, Ohio. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is a great place to go. Right on the beautiful, beautiful Cuyahoga River that does not burn anymore. It's not even a joke there anymore. Don't wait. Register today at contentmarketingworld.com. Use the offer code BeanCast. That's all caps. You got to use all caps for this code, and they'll even knock off $100 when you use this offer code. That's contentmarketingworld.com, offer code BeanCast. Register today, and I'll be looking for you at this year's event. Well, smaller competitors have always been a nuisance. I guess that's a fair way to characterize them. But in the near term, the only real threat to your immediate survival was your bigger competitors. They were the ones who could really put you out of business instantly by moving in a big way. Digital has obviously changed all that, though, by accelerating the pace of change and lowering the bar for entry. Now, every little startup that comes along could be as little as 5 years away from putting you out of business. And if you don't think I'm wrong about that, if you think I'm wrong about that, just consider some of the big players who have gone down to smaller competitors over the last decade. I mean, it's mind-boggling. So, Tamara, it's relatively easy to keep your eye on big players, but how do you anticipate and effectively block the anthill of small players that are often invisible to you until it's too late to act? What's your take on that?
I have actually a really different take on this, and that is that these small businesses are actually a good thing. And that if you think of them as the potential next acquisition for your business and a way to grow your business in new ways that the folks in your inside can't figure out for whatever reason, I actually think the biggest thing to do is to make sure that you've got your eye on the pulse of what's happening with these small businesses and why are they becoming successful, and then go. I mean, this is what Facebook does. I mean, they didn't invent Instagram, they bought it. They didn't invent Snapchat, they bought it. And from my perspective,
They tried to buy Snapchat. They tried to buy Snapchat, but that didn't work.
Well, right. But the point is that, it becomes about making sure that you know how to incorporate that great small business. Now, I've seen it happen a lot of times, and then they suck the life out of that small business after they've incorporated it. So it's not always successful. But to me, it isn't about, blocking them. It's about embracing it, or you're going to end up being roadkill anyways, because it's not like you can stop innovation from happening in small business.
I was going to get to this subject with this talk, and I'm glad you brought this up because, as an analog business, there's a lot to learn from the big tech companies about how they handle emerging threats, because they do always look at the competitive landscape and think, who can we acquire? I mean, what can we put in our portfolio?
Or steal from. I mean, this is why Snapchat was such a great example that Tamara mentioned. Even though they didn't acquire it, everyone knows that Facebook has broadly been stealing from Snapchat. So, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to reinforce your point that if you're not acquiring, you can still be learning from those small upstarts.
No, you're not interrupting. Believe me, I would rather you talk than me talk. That's why people tune in. But yeah, I mean, from a standpoint of an analog business, I mean, Adam, the way that analog businesses run, they're not really thinking about how they can do things like a big tech company. They're thinking about how we work within our structure. And even if they're looking at an acquisition, they're not really equipped to take advantage of that. And, often we hear a lot of advice to be like, act like a startup, be nimble, and be more agile within the way you operate your business, or maybe create an innovation lab, something that can help you to think a little bit more broadly about your problems and think a little bit more deeply about what the solutions could be. Are any of these suggestions really practical for 90% of the businesses out there?
No, they aren't. The issue is that the idea of be like a startup, if you're an enterprise size organization, is you learn to speak another language today. It's just, it doesn't happen like that. You're not that company or that shape, so you can't be that shape. Where I see the success happen inside big enterprises is where they're paying attention to what's happening out in the marketplace, because usually where a smaller business comes up and takes over isn't a direct threat. It's usually not as clear as, a big car rental business and a small car rental business grows up out of the ground and just takes it over. It's something totally indirect. It's Uber all of a sudden, It's a new kind of business that takes over. And then by the time you've recognized that you're in competition with them, you're already in the boiling water.
Oh, yeah, but let's go a little bit further on that, too,
Sure.
because Uber, it was a threat to the cab companies. I mean, they didn't believe it was a threat, and then it became a threat. But it was completely a surprise that it's also a threat to the entire automotive industry.
Oh, yeah, it just keeps on climbing the ladder, right?
Right. So there's ways that businesses pivot that are just you're not able to anticipate them when you're out in the marketplace. I mean, it's just like it becomes increasingly more and more difficult to recognize a threat and react to it. Tamara, going back to you on that, I mean, obviously there's a lot of opportunity in paying attention to startups and seeing what kind of innovations and disruptions are below you to see how you can take advantage of that, how you can acquire it, how you can move with it. But how do you anticipate the unanticipatable, if that's a word?
Well, really what these startups are doing is that they're listening to the voice of the customer that you're not hearing. And if you are listening to your customers well, you will probably pick up signal.
Oh, that's a great point. That's a great point.
Signal like, I don't really want to have to make a car payment, and I don't have a garage, and I live in an urban environment, and what you offer doesn't really suit me. And you can decide that's not your target, that's not your persona, and so this is you're going to ignore that group. But when that group starts becoming the majority of people, you didn't pay attention. So I think that what's happened that's potentially damaging is that the customer experience component of listening and understanding what the preferences are is missing. And that's what's allowing the startup to really come in and whack you from the side.
I find it ironic, though, that we went from one topic where we talked about that clients won't listen to research to the next topic where we're saying the secret is to listen to the voice of the customer. And I can't help but think that these two things are not unrelated, are they?
Oh,
absolutely. You have to take a step back, no matter who you are, and be honest about the challenges and opportunities you have as a business. All these, older companies that have legacy systems, those are the ones that are hard to make pivots for. I mean, you can't fake Virginity, and these startups have that definite advantage when it comes to that. This is why you see, even big businesses like Microsoft out here, or even regular businesses will have, quote unquote hackathons, go back and think, spend a couple of days or, divide into teams, think about the businesses from a completely different angle. And maybe there are some ideas that you can generate that are brand new, even disruptive for a very large enterprise.
And look at Marriott, who's just embraced the idea of vacation rental properties. And they're going to, have their own network. It's even this far along in vacation rental properties, they can still adapt and potentially be very successful at it. So I think that, saying it's too late, we may be overstepping when we say certain things are too late.
Well, this is a great point. I have to just jump in here because I can't agree more. While we talk here about all this fear and risk and it only takes 5 years, the fact of the matter is that in most cases it doesn't. And while there are a few good examples of something where rapid change happened, it usually takes longer. And I think that, interestingly, this article that you cited, Bob, I thought it came to a very obvious conclusion that you need to keep in touch with the customer base and keep innovating. And I think that's a problematic thing to say because everyone realizes that, but that doesn't get to the causes of it. And I think Kodak is a great example, both of what Tamara was saying and what is so problematic with this article is that, popular wisdom is that Kodak didn't get digital photography, but the fact of the matter is that Kodak was no slower to the market than anyone else with digital cameras. They were in lockstep with their competitors. They were just as quick. So you could argue they were in touch with the customer base. They were still innovating. But also to Tamara's point, Kodak didn't go out of business in 5 years or even 10 years. It was a 15 to 20-year slog for it to get to a point where that wonderful, strong, amazing, spectacular brand that was at the top of every list failed. They had all sorts of opportunities to do more and to do quicker. They just refused to cannibalize themselves. And I think part of what we have to understand here is that it's not just about ideas. It's not just about innovation. It's not even just about listening to your customer base. It doesn't do you any good to do that if you are unwilling to put anything at risk. If you are trying to maximize every dollar for this quarter and unwilling to invest anything for the future, you can't expect to compete with these small startups. They will come and eat you for lunch eventually because that is ineffective business strategy.
And I always get tripped up when people get all in this panacea of innovation, that somehow innovation is going to solve it all. And one of my favorite videos to watch, if you can get it from Stanford University, you can watch Kevin Systrom talking about Instagram before Instagram was really a thing. And he's explaining how they aren't using any innovative technology. All they're using is existing technology mixed up with smoke and mirrors to solve basic user consumer problems. I mean, basically, people say it takes too long to upload photos. So we'll give them all kinds of things to do on their photo while it's uploading in the background, and they don't like the way their photos look, so we'll give them free filters. I mean, all this technology existed. All they did was listen to the customer, and I think that's the key takeaway. You were going to say something, Tamara?
Yeah, I just have to completely agree that, and one of the topics that I think is going to become more talked about at events is how do you get your board of directors to understand digital transformation or to understand your corporate strategy shifts that have to happen? Because even at the executive level, they're getting told, no, you can't do anything different. You have to hold on to your legacy because we don't know how to predict the earnings of anything else. And so if corporate America at the board level and the stockholder level doesn't change, then it's kind of doomed to this life cycle that maybe is a good thing. I mean, maybe companies should, get big and then die. That could just be the way that capitalism is supposed to work. But if we want it to be different, it has to start at those high levels like the board.
Well, I want to move on to our next topic of the evening. A notice in Agency Spy caught my eye that Hill Holliday is eliminating the role of project manager at the agency. Now, pretty much anywhere else in the business world, and Augie can back me up on this, project management is like a golden ticket. Lots of jobs out there and not enough trained applicants. You can always find work. There's always money in the banana stand. Well, there's always money in project management as well. So, Augie, this got me thinking about the role, and I wondered, is advertising simply not complex enough to warrant this position anymore, or are they making a mistake here? What's your take on this move to get rid of project management as a role?
Well, I don't know that it's a move. Let's be cautious about this because the article that you cited was actually from October, so I thought I'd do it. And interestingly, the
how
article
does that
cites
happen
sources.
Sometimes? It's just like I look at my articles and they seem to be like recent, but okay.
Well, actually, I kind of like that because we would have had a different conversation if in October about this, right? We would have said, "Ooh, wonder how it's going to turn out for Hill Holliday, and is this a trend?" And so, here we can look at this 8 months, 9 months later and say, I've never heard of anyone else doing it. This article doesn't quote anyone from the agency. It just reports sources. So, I'm in research. So I have to go out and do research, and I go and look, and sure enough, there are a couple of, first of all, the Hill Holliday site has a career site that has an entire section dedicated to the career path for project managers. Right? So I find this a little suspicious. They also currently have 2 openings for both a freelance PM and an operations manager. I suspect maybe this change wasn't to do away with PMs, but they wanted more flexibility, hence went to more freelance. The other thing that's really interesting that I have to mention is that Karen Kaplan, who is the chairman and CEO of Hill Holiday, actually came up from the ranks from receptionist, and she passed through the role of project manager at her own agency. So I don't think they're doing away with it. I've been in the agency world and on the client side. A project manager that's great is worth their weight in gold. Agencies that do away with it, I think, are just cutting off their nose to spite their face. So I want to avoid saying this is a trend. And if anyone else knows of other agencies doing this, by all means, speak up and tell me I'm misinformed. But I think this was once again, sorry, have to say it, an overly provocative article, and I just wonder what the real truth is behind it.
Yeah, and going back to what your premise, Bob, I think in advertising today, projects are more complex than ever in advertising.
Oh,
there are
no
a lot
doubt.
of different deliverables.
They're
There are a
more
lot of
complex.
different-
They're more complex, but it's just like what I was trying to get at was they're not as complex as, say, the entire production process for Eastern Europe for a major technology manufacturer. I mean, it's just like, that those are project management skills that are way beyond the complexity that an average advertising project manager would deal with. I'm not trying to belittle project management in advertising. It's just that it's not on the same scale as major project management things going on in the business world.
I suspect what the article you were referencing was maybe sort of the fourth quarter cost cutting measure. But like Augie said, great project managers are worth their weight in gold. And I don't see, across the clients that I work with and the agencies I work with, I don't think it's going away anywhere. And, yes, everybody has a responsibility to make the trains run on time, but project managers really do. And I don't see it being a trend.
Yeah, doing away with project manager doesn't do away with the tasks that a project manager needs to do. And while advertising projects may not be curing cancer, at the same time they are plenty complex. And I absolutely agree that they're only getting more complex. The more digital and interactive we get, the more we integrate across channels. So somebody still needs to have that view across the entire project. They need to track progress. They need to know that we are going to be on time. They need to be balancing resources or raising alerts. They need to be protecting scope. And if the project manager doesn't do it, in my experience, what that does is it ends up falling onto the account team, and the account team is neither equipped to do that, nor do you want them focused on the mechanics of the project. You want them focused on the account.
For me, when I read this article, the takeaway from it was that it's not that project management should be gotten rid of, but I did like this idea. And Adam, back me up here if you can. I mean, there's something to be said about forcing other team members to take more responsibility for coordinating and delivering projects. And, while you can't get rid of a project manager, the project managers I've always dealt with have been the most frustrated people at the agency because nobody else takes responsibility for meeting their deadlines or doing things. They just wait to be bugged by the project manager. And it seems like this is the real problem.
That sounds very close to an argument that we should do away with cops and ask the criminals to be a lot more responsible.
No, but I mean, it's just like, we should be more responsible. It's just like, you don't get rid of the cops. You got to make people more responsible. It's just like, that's the answer.
I can certainly get your back on the fact that people complain about project managers, and project managers are very frustrated. That is a fact. But one thing, at the top of this chat, we were talking about how agencies don't respect the output of professionals at the agency. And as clients pinch down on budget, we really can only cut so close when we're cutting creative people or we're cutting account people. A lot of times for smaller agencies, and this is agencies under 80 people, project management might be a thing that gets replaced by software and I've seen this a lot where they'll gut a 6-person team and cut it down to 1 person managing an array of software to manage timelines and deadlines. And so you're not getting the actual expertise that you need of a project manager. You're getting 1 person spinning out Gantt charts and flinging them left and right to account people to try to level them up, to Augie's point. They're not equipped to do project management. So there's usually 1 person that's orchestrating and trying to help them, which really is very challenging and doesn't work. So as as budgets get tighter and clients keep wondering, well, why does this cost so much? Well, if you want a good project manager to look at your brand new website that we're working on that has to tie into an online ordering system that we're building from scratch and ads to go across 3 regions in the country and Canada, you're going to need someone who understands the technology, the creative, the workflow, your business, and all the vendors. And that's a project manager. So it's really a shame when you see those people pushed out, or well, I'm not sure if this article, as Augie's pointed out, was all it was cracked up to be. But when you see those people getting pushed out, it gets a little scary and sad for the people left behind at that agency.
Well, I just want to point out I've gotten full value out of an 8-month-old article, so I feel really good about that. So let's move on to the last topic. Since I have you on the horn, Adam, I'm just going to continue with you. Instagram has announced a new feature that allows ad buyers to identify influencer posts that are complimentary of their products or their company or their services. And then with the permission of the poster, you can turn that post into an advertisement on Instagram. Adam, good idea or disaster waiting to happen? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I think the answer is both. When we were just talking about innovation, we say listen to your customers, and that's the way to go. And this is Instagram watching how really great social agencies operate. They are doing listening in real time. They're waiting to see if someone they haven't proactively reached out to is communicating about their brand or their client's brand, and reaching out to them and saying, oh, we love your post on our client shampoo. Can we work with you and either post that or do something new? That's been how it's working for 2, 3, 4 years at the very top. So Instagram is listening and paying attention and saying, well, we could bring this system wide and have the local hairdresser have access to that too, if there's an influencer that can pay off. So there's a big positive. This is going to allow a lot of brands, or maybe companies that aren't quite brands, to get into this game, to use influencers to amplify their message and be more relevant. I think that's really good. Is it a disaster waiting to happen? Oh, I am waiting for the next time I'm on with you, Bob, and we're talking about some influencer mix-up that caused some terrible ad problem that flops, and we're all talking about that as a topic on the BeanCast. But I think overall the good potential of it outweighs the disasters. There's always going to be disasters, but this, I think, is going to be a really good opportunity for smaller businesses that are doing it right and paying attention.
Augie, I'd love your take on this one because, from a standpoint of what Adam's saying, there is a real potential for your reputation to be marred even if you agree to a brand using your post to promote the product. There's always the potential for blowback coming back on the influencer saying, you just posted that because you were going to get money from it, blah, 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 blah. Then, the outrage web is going to take over. So is that a reality? Is that some kind of danger that a lot of influencers need to worry about? And will it potentially put a lid on the effectiveness of this particular tactic?
Well, there's dangers both ways, right? I mean, first of all, I remain a little bit of an influence doubter, which I know is kind of rare in the marketing world these days. I certainly recognize influence happens. I mean, in my customer experience practice and the advisory sessions I have with clients, we talk a lot about advocacy and how important it is to earn it and how to earn it and those sorts of things. So I'm not denying the power or potential power of influencers, but when you look at how much attention it gets in the marketing world these days, I am not sure that the potential is matched with what's actually happening out there. Anyways, my larger point though is that a brand that simply sees a post from an influencer and buys it is taking a risk. You've got to still do the legwork, the homework. You still have to know what this influencer represents. You're as good at that point as the influencer's next post. If they post something inappropriate, now you're associated with them. I think, as you pointed out, there's also a risk to the influencer. Every influencer post, I think, that is paid for or bought, either way. I mean, and so we've got two different approaches here to how to bring money into the influencer relationship. But I think everyone that is bought or paid for diminishes the influence. At some point, people stop listening. And interestingly enough, I think in your Good, Bad, Ugly, we're going to talk about an influencer with like 2 million followers who tried to start up a clothing brand and only sold 252 items, which, demonstrates
Way to give it
that,
away. Way to give it away.
Yeah, don't jump ahead. Don't jump ahead.
edit that out or call that a spoiler. But the point is that we can't talk on one hand about this really popular influencer who couldn't sell 253 items with all the influence and their name on the brand itself, and then at the same time talk about the value of buying influencer posts. So let's just say we need to be very, very careful about how we measure these things and make sure we're actually getting true value out of it. And I think we've got to be aware of risks on both sides of this relationship.
Something you said is terrifying out of all that. A lot of what you said is scary, but the most terrifying thing I heard in all of that was this idea that if you're using an influencer, you're not properly, if you're using an influencer using this system, you're not necessarily vetting that influencer the way you would if you were doing a deal directly with them on an ongoing basis. In other words, you're not looking at their past posts, you're not looking at the legitimacy of their audience. You're just looking at a few numbers and this nice thing that this influencer said. You might look back at a few things that they have posted in the past, but you're not doing the full vetting. I can see a lot of brands cutting corners with this and just jumping in with both feet and ending up with a really bad situation as a result of it.
It just seems to me, as somebody who has been on and listened to this the BeanCast for so long, it just seems like every other week we're either talking about how great influencers are, or we're talking about the latest brand or influencer to get caught in some scandal and how the brands had to distance themselves. And so, there's value here, but it's value that is not as easy as looking at accounts or seeing a post that you like and putting a bid in on it. There's just more to it, and I think brands have got to be very cautious about the investment, the risk, and what they're getting out of it, and in a way that I'm not sure that they really are today.
I think other social media will follow suit. I can see someone being able to promote someone else's tweet, for example.
Oh yeah.
And I think that influencers, like, I'm sitting here thinking as an influencer or, wannabe influencer, I'm going to post more to Instagram and maybe I can get my name out there because somebody picks up my post and promotes it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. It's just, it's entirely designed to boost the Instagram ecosystem at our expense. I mean, that's just the way it's going to work.
I'm going to get rich. Now that I think about this, I'm going to start posting about every movie that's coming out. I'm a big movie fan and I post regularly about movies, but now I'm going to post in advance of them coming out because we know that the movie studios are interested in increasing the opening. They're not generally that interested in about the third week after the movies come out. So now I think I'm just going to keep talking about how exciting every movie looks, and something tells me I can get rich on this.
And thankfully, Instagram is now stealing all of Snapchat's filters, so you can use that I'm 20 years old filter that makes you look young and hip and svelte, and definitely somebody that everybody wants to listen to.
It's going to take more than a filter to make that happen for me, but thanks.
Well, it's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly. But before we get to that segment of the show, and, pretty much we already have gotten to that segment of the show, right. I want to take this opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to do some shameless plugs, starting with Tamara Gaffney. You can find her at quantentmarketing.com. Link will be in the show notes. Tell us what's going on in your world, Tamara. What would you like to promote?
Oh, well, I've been making a lot of progress on building templates and a training program for helping analysts with telling better stories, to bring their data to life, to make executives really understand what to do with it, and to avoid that dreaded dashboard. Don't do the dashboard. That's what I have to say.
There's such an inside joke there, but I won't tell it. That's fantastic, Tamara. Well, next up, Dan Goldgeier. You can find him at dangoldgeier.com. That's where you can buy his books and feed his dog. Tell us what's going on in your world, Dan. What would you like to promote?
Yes, well, and since the last time I was on the BeanCast, my wife and I adopted a new dog, a 7-year-old Australian cattle dog named Jeffrey. And our last one had crossed the Rainbow Bridge, unfortunately. But Jeffrey is hungry, and Jeffrey loves chew toys. So the best way you can help is by going on to Amazon.com and buying my book, Killer Executions and Scrubbed Decks. an outside the box look at obnoxious advertising and marketing jargon. All proceeds go to feed Jeffrey. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Now, next we have Adam Pierno. You can find him at asu.edu. That's the home of Arizona State University, where he is a vice president of marketing. Tell us what's going on in your world, Adam. What would you like to promote?
Oh, I would love to promote my new book. It's called Specific. It's about building brands in a world that doesn't want any more. The world is full of brands, and we really care about them much less than the people on this podcast would wish. And the book is all about the ways that really smart brands, really smart companies are paying attention to pop culture and the way it transmits, and borrowing or flat out stealing those ideas to build their own brands.
Oh yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, and definitely check out his book. It's pretty damn good.
Thanks.
Last but not least, we have Augie Ray. You can find him at Gartner.com. That's where you're leading the customer experience practice. Am I right about that?
Leading the practice for marketing and CX leaders. We have different people that lead practices for IT and tech providers, but we are all collaborating every day. So it's a big collaborative tent at Gartner.
And you have anything you want to promote?
Actually, no, I don't. Just would say that any of you who are listening, if you're Gartner clients and want to improve customer experience, I'm certainly available to help. We've published great research, and if you're not a Gartner client and would like to learn more, feel free to reach out to me, and I will get you connected with somebody at Gartner. We, I think, are doing great work. Our clients are very happy with the advisory services and research we're publishing, and with the recent acquisition of CEB, the Corporate Executive Board, and L2 and Iconoculture. We're just doing a lot of exciting work at Gartner these days.
It really is some great work that you guys are doing over there, and I highly recommend Gartner as a choice for your consultancy. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me, and of course, you can find out how to advertise on the program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First, the good. You may remember last year that IHOP caught a lot of heat for changing their name temporarily to IHOB in order to promote burgers, International House of Burgers they were calling themselves. Haters were plentiful, you remember that, Dan, but which makes this year's burger promotion so exquisite, as they troll their trolls with a snarky pancake promotion that instead features burgers and an online band cake list that calls out the best and the worst trolling from the last year and kind of offers free coupons to people who come to the site and find their name on the troll list. This is pretty innovative, don't you think, Dan?
Yeah, I was a fan of IHOP's promotion to try to at least influence behavior last year, to try to get people to a lunch crowd, a dinner crowd, more burgers. I'm glad at least they're coming back to it. And hopefully this sets a pattern for the future, because I think it's a good business move. We'll see how, successful they are trolling trolls, but I certainly get the business case for this, and I hope they stick with promoting burgers. I think it's a good move for them.
Some of the initial results that are coming back is people are like loving the band cake list. There's something about trolls that they love to see their name being promoted on a website. And here there's this whole list of like, oh, I made the list. Oh, and I get $10 off at an IHOP. This is fantastic. And it's just brilliant to go after the trolls and actually laud them as opposed to go after them. I thought that was pretty well thought out in terms of a campaign. As for the bad for this week, Augie already told you about this one, so I will go about this with a little bit.
So you're just going to say Augie. Augie is bad.
Augie. Exposing once again the inherent risks of ill thought out influencer marketing plans. A clothing manufacturer working with Instagram star Ari, I guess that's how you pronounce her name, is pulling the plug on an Ari fashion line after they marketed the products to her 2.6 million followers and received orders for only 252 items over 2 weeks. Augie, that's a stunning 0.009% response rate, which I might add is a couple points below the average response rate for a banner ad, which is 0.006%. So there you have it.
And the thing is that I think there are a lot of people who are listening that could say, "Hey, if I sold something with a influencer and was able to sell 252 items, that would be pretty good. That might not actually be a bad response rate overall. Except we have to step back and say this wasn't an ad, it wasn't a product, it was an entire line. It was pushed by this influencer, for some period of time." So anyways, I think we have to put just how bad this was and maybe how telling it was, because think of all the brands that line up for every attractive male and female model on Instagram that has 2.6 million followers, to think that this is an opportunity. And this should be a little bit of a warning side, which again, my point is just go back and make sure you are measuring the results. This is not PR, this is advertising.
And can I just add on this one?
Yes,
because
please.
With Instagram, I think people still don't understand, shoppable social and commerce on Instagram. They just don't understand it. But what my research showed was that the people who are selling successfully are those who are more real looking, the ones who are more like us and not so much of a, tiny, skinny, tall, model-like person. That the reason why Instagram works for shopping is more because of the fact that it's more relatable. And so I think that the article didn't really talk about, why it didn't work, but there's a lot in there to learn. And I think that's what's important about this particular one, is what can we learn from it about how to use Instagram successfully.
Oh, I like that. I like that thinking. Well, the ugly one for this week. Any vegetarians on the panel here tonight? I'm not really sure. I know everybody meat eater. So if there's one thing,
sadly, yes.
If there's one thing every meat eater should know, it's don't serve your vegetarian friends meat products. But that's exactly what one Burger King in Brooklyn did. They added their Impossible Burger Whopper to their Seamless page, but failed to put it up correctly in some way, and then filled all those orders at them with regular Whoppers.
When I read this, I thought maybe it was a joke, or I went and Googled it because I just thought this is like almost like a Tales from the Crypt story. It's so horrible. It's the worst thing you could do to someone. But I have been won over by Impossible, and I am driving past the Burger King near my house to see when they get it on the menu, and I will go. But I guess if it came out like a regular Whopper, I'd be fine with it. It wouldn't cost me much.
That's just it's not just scary. That's almost dangerously unhealthy for
yeah, you could hurt somebody, yeah.
Yeah, they're lucky they didn't get sued their king crowns off. I mean,
it does point to, though, how many times have we read in the last 5 years, though, questions about whether the organic items you're buying in the store aisle is really organic. And now we've got the meatless meat that is so good that you can't tell the difference. And if you can't tell the difference, then maybe a restaurant's going to get away with not. I mean, it's interesting to me how much faith we put in the labeling of food. So I think there's a really interesting and deep aspect to this rather ugly story.
I suggest everybody take a tour of at least one New York kitchen, and that'll forever tell you what the truth of eating here is all about. Well, have a suggestion for the list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag #GBU. Well, that about does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcasts listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
It's like, you know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly.